retail inflation numbers at about 5.55%, inching very close to the RBI's upper band of tolerance at 6%.
Right, and that also means that every single time you ask the RBI why it's not cutting rates, and I think last time, you had the recent monetary policy review where for the 5th consecutive monetary policy review in 10 months, you had India's Reserve Bank of India, India's central bank, holding on, pausing on neither raising interest rates nor cutting interest rates. So where RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das made it very clear that you can't react to short-term data. We'll have to see how data pans out over a period of time. But 5.55%, as you're rightly pointing out, is close to that 6% threshold, the 4 to 6% threshold that India wants to operate under. So concerns remain as far as inflation is concerned. Of course, you have food inflation, which is difficult to tame,
which is in fact driving the retail inflation upward. Come to think of it, food inflation basket at 8.7%. Now, food inflation baskets accounts for about 50% of the retail inflation overall, and that is what is proving to be a dampener. You have rainfalls which are unpredictable, weather patterns that are swiftly changing. Government, despite all efforts that it can take to buffer up our stock, has not been able to contain food inflation.
Right. It's a complex problem as far as food inflation is concerned. Very difficult to manage. India is a big country. Very difficult to manage. To get the exact same amount of rainfall uniformly across the country. So erratic rainfall has meant that crops somewhere have failed, somewhere is okay. So in that sense of food inflation, let's face it, it's not just new. We've seen issues, in the last 6 months to 8 months where everything from tomato to onions to ginger, every single piece of that food basket, those daily essentials, the prices shooting up. And then in fact, government intervention, bringing those sanity back to prices. If you remember what happened with the tomato prices a few months ago, it just went on to astronomical levels, 200 rupees per kilogram. And then it was government intervention is the reason why you and I buy tomatoes today at a decent price. Same applies for onions as well. Of course, things like pulses, or inflation in pulses and other food grains have also been controlled only because of government intervention. But whereas the challenges remain in terms of making sure there's enough stock and the stock that meets demand, and then prices don't spiral up the moment any kind of problem happens in the supply chain. A lot of times what happens is that you have these truckers strike, you have issues where taking the food commodities from one place to another becomes a problem. So availability in a particular place becomes a problem. For example, if there's a trucker strike in Maharashtra, people in Delhi NCR get their onions from Maharashtra. So if there's trucker strike in Maharashtra, there's actually no problem with the onion crop. There's no problem with anything. But because of a trucker strike, we'll have a shortage. And tomorrow morning when you open Swiggy, you'll have onions at 150 rupees a kilo. So there are those kind of issues as well that affect food prices, essential food prices in this country. So I think how the RBI can control food inflation is anybody's guess. The RBI cannot control food inflation, but of course general policies to ensure that there is no sudden spikes in daily essentials over a period of time will hold us in good stead to ensure that that inflation number remains within that 4 to 6% mark, and hopefully comes closer to the 4% mark, so that we can all get some interest rate cuts and get home loans and car loans cheaper than what we've been getting so far.
It doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. But remember, government has taken various initiatives, as Krishna pointed out, to increase the prices of what we call essentially TOP, T-O-P, tomatoes, onions and potatoes, all of which have been very relatively expensive in the past few months. And then comes the pulses, the essentials, green vegetables, which are also burning a hole in the common man's pocket. But most, I think what I could read, and that has come in most recently, is the fact that government is also now planning to remove import curbs on certain other pulses, including your chana dal, which are also essential. So every stock, every effort therefore taken in to maintain that buffer stock to ensure that as we hold on to as much as we can by the way of wheat, by the way of rice, and also remove import curbs where we had them prior to this month. So I think the big challenge for this government as well as for the RBI would be to tame food inflation in the months to come. And we are now hearing and reading about how El Nino weather patterns will continue the next year as well.
Yes.
So on one hand, it becomes difficult for RBI to cut rates. On the other hand, it becomes increasingly difficult for the government, which will be contesting the general elections now in coming 2 to 3 months, to tame the monster of inflation, but this has a direct impact on the public. It has an impact on people's ability to spend on their pockets.
Right. You're looking at a situation where the US inflation refuses to stop its upward climb. Everybody in the US, we keep talking about how, oh my God, will the US Fed cut interest rates next month? Will it cut interest rate next quarter? Looks like it's not going to happen anytime soon, because the US CPI, consumer price inflation, is inching upwards as well. So in that sense, inflation is a challenge, if you ask me, in the post-pandemic world, where so much has changed, where consumption patterns have also been altered, and weather patterns add to the problems all the time either way. So in that sense, yes, it is a big challenge, and I'm sure this government will be very clear about taming inflation as they get into election campaigning mode, because they clearly know that that's one thing you can't mess around with. Mehengai is not the right message that you can go to people with. Humne mehengai ghatai is a good message.
It's a message. In fact, Finance Minister also very vehemently said in the Parliament that we have contained retail inflation. So we are doing the best we can. And in fact, they've taken measures. LPG subsidy, for that matter, was introduced in the past month to ensure that the burden on common man is also in a way negated or catered to. That has happened, and other measures that the government, of course,
let's just hope that
take.
like those measures that you're talking about, the government is doing permutations and combinations over a period of time, and I have no doubt in my mind that this government will be very clear about keeping inflation within those permissible limits. And in fact, eventually, by the time we get to election, if they bring it down below 5%, they have clearly something to show off to people that look at where we've got inflation. It was inching closer to 6%. It was above 6%. In fact, pandemic time, there was no control of what was going on with inflation, but we've brought it down to the 4% levels, below the 5% levels. That's a great campaigning motto to go with. I'm sure they're looking forward to doing that, and that's the reason why you're the finance minister talking about it. But fingers crossed, Shweta.
Absolutely.
Hopefully, inflation comes below the 5% levels to around 4%.
All right, so we'll have to wait and watch out for what happens in the month of December. But as far as November inflation figures is concerned, not looking very good at 5.55%.